Morning, everyone. Dan Salomons here, New Responders. We have a special guest with us today. This handsome fella is my brother, Sid. He is a police officer now for a major service in the GTA. And we're going to talk a little bit about his experience as a police officer, but more importantly, his journey to getting hired and his experience going through the hiring process. So without further ado, Mr. Salomons, just give us a brief introduction, who you are, where you work, and where you're currently signed.
Yeah, morning. I'm a police officer, like my brother Dan there said, in the GTA. In total, I've been doing that for 16 years. I did 11 years of the frontline response, and then I moved into, I became a use of force instructor, and I've been doing that for 5 years now. And primarily, I do firearms, scenario-based training, and defensive tactics.
Awesome. So let's get right into it and share a little about your journey for the hiring process. I'm curious to know, and I'm sure everyone else listening is curious to know. Tell us about what you did to prepare yourself. Talk about what worked well for you, and if you had to change anything in your preparation, what would that be? So I know there's a lot of questions there, so let's just start with the first one. How'd you prepare yourself for your interviews and your overall hiring process?
Yeah, so out of high school, like I knew I wanted to be a police officer, and I also knew it was going to be a bit of a process. So I didn't rush right into applying. I did a lot of extracurricular courses on weekends and that sort of on my own time. I didn't go right into police foundations after I graduated from high school either. I got some working experience, knew I needed a little bit more life experience. And then I did a 12-month expedited police foundations program. So it was 12 months straight. They kind of took a 2-year program and then crunched it down into 1 full year. So within that, again, during school, I did some courses on the side just to sort of beef up my application and make it look a lot more attractive. I kind of put myself in the shoes of the recruiting officer, and with the number of applications that they see coming across their desk, I wanted mine to stand out compared to, the hundreds of others that they're looking at. And I did that by extra courses and then volunteering. I was a big brother for a number of years when I lived in Kingston, and while I was working there I was doing security work at one of the hospitals, volunteered, and that's really what was the biggest stepping stone to getting into a policing career and getting hired. So like I said, it took about a year off after high school. I did that 12-month police foundations program. I got into security work to understand the industry and what that was all about. The first year or so, I did like an alarm response type security job.
Right.
And that was good for like driving around in a marked car that was in the public got to see that. They were watching me all the time. Did the alarm response, had to do the investigations to see how a lot of it was to do with schools. So, how the school was broken into, or why the alarm went off. Not a ton of public interaction there. And I sort of realized that after a while, and that's why I switched it up and applied for a job as a security guard at a hospital. Because like I said, there was really where I got a good experience and understanding of what it would be like to interact with people on a daily basis. That, at hospitals, not many people are having a great day there. So as the security guard, law enforcement at the hospital, sometimes you're called there to de-escalate, or you're called there to deal with a situation where people are coming in on or during an emergency, and you're the one that they sort of look to for advice or things like that. So yes, they're coming there for some sort of healthcare reason, but when things get out of hand, like the nursing staff would call us if a patient got too violent, and then we'd be the one that we'd have to go there and sort of settle the circumstance. So
Yeah, no, I know we've talked about this in the past, and there are definitely different types of security jobs, and some are going to provide you with better experience. But I mean, just take whatever security job you can get would be my advice to start. And I know you mentioned you were doing mobile patrol and whatnot. So what you have to do in a position like that, you might not have a lot of interaction with the public, but there's still certain areas that you can talk about that would make you a better police officer. And you mentioned the mobile patrol. If you think about how much driving you're going to be doing as a police officer, I mean, you have to take courses on driving. You have to do driver's training every year to make sure that your driving is up to par. And
yep.
You know, you have to know all the emergency maneuvers and whatnot. So you have to look for the positive in all the jobs that you do. And if you do have a job where you might not be talking to members of the public or interacting with them, then there still are things that you can draw from that experience and talk about in your interview process or throughout your hiring process, wherever it comes up. And driving is a huge one. So
yeah, absolutely. I got a number of examples for interview questions from that alarm response, right? Like that has a lot to do with the Trespass to Property Act and knowing my authorities from that. I made a number of arrests while I was doing that alarm response. So like I said, I did it for a couple of years, got very good at it, got promoted within that position, but then also realized that I needed the public interaction part to become more comfortable in that future policing role that I knew I wanted to do.
So when did you know, or when did you decide that your experience as a security officer was going to be enough to submit your application? Because I find with the security jobs, they kind of plateau after a few years. There's going to be some opportunity to get promoted within the company, but realistically, and it's the same for the police department as well. There's just not enough positions to promote everybody. So when did you decide, or when did you know that, okay, based on my work experience, my life experience, my educational experience, this is going to be enough for me to submit my application?
So it's actually a pretty good segue into your final question there about what I would do different. So I started applying when I was in my early 20s and finally got hired when I was 26. And was there a moment that I knew where what I had would look good on a resume? Absolutely. Like I had the volunteer work, I had the work experience, I had the schooling, and that sort of took 3 or 4 years for me to make sure I had all of that stuff, like all my ducks in a row sort of thing.
Right.
When I started putting my application out there and getting calls for interviews, you know, that's sort of when I knew, yes, what I had on paper is what some police services were looking for. Mm-hmm. I remember when I interviewed with the police service that I got hired by, they said, after the interview was over, they're like, yeah, we can really tell that you prepared well for this interview. That didn't come easy, right? For me, it was a sort of trial by error sort of thing. I didn't have anybody to guide me through it. So a lot of times the first application I put out there wasn't the same. It didn't look the same as sort of my final application, the one that really was able to get me hired. You know, the first interview that I went through, I wasn't successful at. Walking out of that interview, I knew I wasn't as prepared as I could have been. Fitness wise, like I've always been an athletic person. I came from an athletic family. I've got 4 brothers and 2 sisters, and we were always very active. So the fitness side of thing, that's always been a part of my life. So that wasn't a big concern for me. I didn't have to put that at the top of my list for priorities because that was already where it needed to be. One of your final question there is like what I would do different is I wish that I had had sort of a resource or someone to guide me through the entire process, or before I started that process to be like, this is what you need to be an attractive candidate, or to have sort of the total package put together, so that you know what to expect when you're going through the process. There were some things in interviews where I'm like, they'd ask me a question and I would have to come up with an answer sort of on the fly. Whereas after I had done a couple of the interviews, the questions became sort of similar and repetitious, repetitive. And on my second, third, fourth interview, I'm like, okay, I know sort of what to expect now for my next interview. So if I had somebody to say, this is what you need to do to prepare, or this is how you can be ready for whatever comes in the interview, even fitness wise, right? Like not walking into something blind, or the difference between that and knowing what to expect made a huge difference. And that can bring your stress level down significantly, right? Which then allows you to perform to the best of your abilities. And I wish I had had that, because I knew I had what it would take to be a police officer. I knew I had what is attractive for police services and hiring officers. And it took me a little bit longer, I think, to get there, to get hired, than what it could have if I had somebody to sort of guide me through that process.
Yeah. So it's a very common thing to not be successful on your first attempt, and even the first couple of attempts. I was in the same boat. I was not successful my first attempt. I was hyper focused on getting 100% on the physical, that I forgot about the rest of the stuff, or I didn't prepare properly for the rest of the stuff. And I was sent home the first time I applied almost right away after the first test. I didn't pass it. So is it fair to say that it's just as important to train your brain as it is to train your body for this process?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. So you had mentioned that you had taken courses, and I talk about that in my ACE Your application program and constable application program. That's a good way to bolster your application. Can you tell us what sort of courses you took and how they benefited your application or benefited you as a police officer? Or do you remember? It's a long time ago.
Yeah, I know, right? Probably one of the best courses I took. It was a person in crisis course, and that was effective across the board from like whatever call I went to when I finally got hired. Because everybody is in some sort of crisis to one degree or another. And I didn't really realize it, right? But like anytime I stopped a car for a traffic violation, that's could be a mini crisis. And some people, it's a major crisis, right? Because they got tears coming down their eyes by the time you walk up to their car.
Yeah, for sure.
Right. And so that's their mini crisis or major crisis. And then you get to the other extreme where it's like you're dealing with families who are having a major crisis for whatever reason. And now they look to you for answers or to be the calm in the room. And, there's so many examples that I can think of where that calm is contagious, and it doesn't matter. Sometimes it doesn't matter what you say to them, it's how you say it. And if you can stay calm in a time of crisis for somebody, then that usually brings them back down to where they can sort of operate in a how to say that, but
come back down to earth a little bit.
Yeah. It just allows them to be more of themselves again, where, I think everybody has had an experience where you go through something and I can't believe that I reacted like that. Whereas if I had just sort of taken a breath and came back down and my heart rate's back down to normal, then yeah, I probably would have responded a little bit more rationally or something that made a bit more sense.
Mhm.
So yeah, that was probably the most effective course that I took. Um, yeah, I'm trying to think of what other courses I would have taken.
Let me ask you this then, as a defensive tactics instructor and a firearms instructor, is there anything that these potential applicants can do? Are there any courses that you would recommend in order to make them, I get, still be a better applicant, but take it one step further than that? So they've been hired and now they're starting off. As a firearms instructor and a defensive tactics instructor, is there anything that they can do? Is there any courses that they can take to make themselves a better police officer to start their career off? And I'll give you an instance. I have a couple of connections where if you've never shot a gun before, you can go and do a couple of introductory courses with these gentlemen, and they'll teach you how to shoot a gun. But I'll just let you give our thoughts on that one.
Yeah, I think you sort of nailed it there, where it's like if you haven't had any experience whatsoever in, so I'll talk about firearms, right? Like, you know, we grew up on a farm, so we knew we had a firearm there. We knew what the sighting system looked like, how that worked, you know, being smooth on the trigger. But if you don't know what those terms mean, then yeah, any kind of experience you could get to that, any kind of an introductory course you could do to become familiar with that. Not only, again, would make you feel more comfortable handling a firearm for the first time in an introductory course, rather than getting hired and then the first time you handle it is when you get on the range, say at the police college or at whatever services range you're on.
Yeah.
You know, same thing with defensive tactics, right? Like, again, we had 4 brothers, and the number of times that we got into wrestling matches or, you know, even fist fights, right? Like, it wasn't the first time that I got into a fight wasn't while I was on the job, right? Like, I played competitive sports my entire childhood and even now as an adult, and those things happen during those sporting events too. So, you know, knowing, there's a couple of things. It benefits yourself so that you've got the experience in either with a gun or with defensive tactics. So, you know, I know a lot of officers are into BJJ or some sort of grappling, and that gives them confidence, right? It's as a firearms instructor, I want you to be as proficient with that firearm as you can, but I hope you never have to use it. And same thing with defensive tactics, right? I hope you're very proficient at it. You're comfortable if you ever find yourself in that situation, but I hope you never have to use it. So talking about the personal side of it, if you feel more comfortable with it, great. But then that also shows a recruiting officer that you're not just doing the bare minimum to put in an application, right? It's something that you're actually dedicated to bettering yourself at for a career that you're about to get into.
100%. I tell the participants in my courses all the time that if you want to have an outstanding application, then you have to do outstanding things. And outstanding things are things that other people aren't doing. So things like going to range and shooting, so that when it's their first day on the job and you hand them their gun, you know, they know the basics of it. Business end goes down the shooting range, stuff like that, right? I'm sure you'd be much more comfortable with people that are familiar with handguns and guns in general. You guys do the rifles there too, so
yeah, you can tell right away who's handled a gun before and who hasn't. And for some people that haven't, it's probably the most stressful thing that they'll ever have to do. And, you know, there's life-changing things that can happen if you don't know how to handle a gun properly. So yeah, any experience that you can get with that is going to be beneficial.
Yeah, and I know you talked about, you know, being familiar with a gun and being comfortable with it and hoping that you'll never have to use it, and that's true words there for sure. When it comes to the defensive tactics, I would say that you're almost 100% guaranteed that at some point throughout your career, you're going to have to go hands-on with somebody.
Oh, for sure. Yeah.
So it's important to, if you didn't have 3 or 4 brothers or whatever, or sisters or whatever, and grow up wrestling and being rough and stuff like that, I think it's absolutely important to go out, and I'm not saying you got to go out and fight everybody, but go out and take some sort of defensive tactics course, or MMA or judo or whatever it is, just to roll around with somebody and feel what it's like to have somebody fight you back. And
I think,
and just know that, you know what, I might not be able to beat this person up, or not beat them up, but gain control of them and whatnot. But at least you have to at least know how to hang on and survive until all your buddies show up and help you out.
yeah.
Is that fair to say?
Yeah, I think Mike Tyson said it best, where he's like, everybody has a plan until they get punched in the face.
100%. Yeah.
Even, having gotten punched in the face, right? Like it rings you up pretty good. And if you've never been punched in the face before, you're going to be really surprised when that does happen. But in the same breath, getting punched in the face doesn't necessarily mean that the fight's over, right?
No.
Like you can, it's a good way to measure like how much, like what an actual fight is really like, right? And if you can do that in a controlled setting with somebody that's like, okay, we're going to go 50% now we're going to go 80%, and try and be as realistic as you can without, having to go out and challenge somebody to a fight. It's rather know what that feels like than not know the first time you have to get into a fight.
Yeah. It's the same sort of thinking behind why they spray everyone with pepper or OC spray.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. To know that if it does come out and you do get sprayed, it's going to suck and it hurts, but you can fight through it. And just because you got sprayed doesn't mean fight's over and you get to go home.
Yep.
You still have to go. Okay. We'll wrap this up soon. So yeah, I guess we kind of touched on this. Is there any last words of advice that you can give to somebody that we maybe haven't talked about, where they're either nervous about putting in their application because they don't think they have enough credentials, or what it is that they can do to make themselves a more viable candidate, or just put their mind at ease, if you can, about the hiring process and what the best approach for that would be?
Yeah, so I did sort of touch on it a little bit before. Like I said, I kind of went through everything the first couple of times on my own. And if I had somebody to tell me, this is what you should be preparing for, physically, mentally, spiritually, emotionally, all those things, I wouldn't have had to learn so much the hard way, right? Yeah. Like I said, it took me a number of years to actually get hired, and it's not fun getting turned down. It's not fun getting rejected. And if I had somebody to sort of guide me through that process, to be like, look at what I had on paper as an applicant, to be like, okay, you can improve in this area or that area, or what you're doing so far is good here. That would have saved me a lot of time and heartache, to be honest. And I think I would have been successful sooner in my career.
Yeah, I think you nailed it there. The time and the heartache is huge, because while we talked about that it's a common thing not to be successful on your first attempt, when you start stretching it out into like 3 or 4 or 5 or even 6 attempts to get on a police force, the timeline gets really extended there because of the amount of time you have to wait between applications.
Yeah.
So sometimes it can take up to a year before you can submit another application, if you're as hard as set on one police service, right?
Yeah.
And then with that time delay, also, it can chip away at your motivation and your self-worth and whatnot, and you start second guessing yourself and saying, well, maybe I don't have what it takes, when really all you really need is someone to say, you know what, let me guide you through it. Let's take all your experience and all your credentials, and I'll show you how to package it up so that when you sit down, you know what you're talking about, you know what information they're looking for, and you know how to formulate your answers. I was the same way. I had nobody to guide me. There were a number of people that I reached out to who I thought I could learn something from. So I did reach out to a number of people to just ask questions, seek advice. But I was the same boat. There was nobody there to help you. You can ask your recruiting officer a few questions, but they don't have all day to sit down and go through your application package with a fine-tooth comb and give you pointers and advice on how to be a more viable candidate.
Yeah.
Awesome. Well, I appreciate your time today. I hope everybody else appreciates it as well. And maybe you'll meet some new future employees as they come through new responders here.
Keep my eye out for them.
All right. Take care, Sid.
You too.